Today we will be showing you how to make a 17th century-like still life by looking closely at Dutch painter Pieter Cleasz. We will be focusing on the lemon. Why is that?
The lemon is one of the most remarkable objects in 17th century still life paintings. Pieter Cleasz, who made this painting, was one of the first, if not the first, to paint a peeled lemon like this on a plate. In this painting you see a very nicely peeled lemon lying on a tin plate that is just on the rim of the table, as if you can pick it up from the table. It's therefore a very interactive painting. You see it also with the knife that's also on the rim of the table so that you can pick it up. The lemon in the painting, just like many objects in still life paintings, was painted according to a very standard manner. It was used during the whole 17th century, more or less the same, how they would paint lemons, and that's what we'll be doing today. I have here a lemon and a knife, and I will be trying to peel it according to a 17th century method, so that you will have the top, and after that the peel, making the pulp visible.
Please mind your fingers, guys.
Clearing the top. As you saw in the painting, Pieter Cleasz did that as well. Lemon pieces. Like Pieter Cleasz, I'm using a panel, and I have already grounded it with a white gesso layer, and on top of that there's a yellow ochre layer. Next step is making the palette. I'll be setting up the palette, and I'm just doing it for the lemon for now. We need only 6 colors, and I'm putting them on the palette in the order of appearance. That's zinc white, now adding ochre, a black, and a very bright yellow. After that, a very light yellow, and a blue. And with that, I'll be starting to paint the white pith of the lemon. As you can see, I'm using the white so to paint the contours. You could also start with the lid side of the peel, but it's more difficult to define the shape. And so when you're starting at once, like I'm doing, without a sketch, then this is the easiest way to do it. And what you always try, or what 17th century painters always tried, was to paint it more or less life size. Here some light falls in, so I'm painting this very white. Black, so I'll be painting the shadow of the pith. I have refined the pith a bit, so you see that I have added more ochre and there's some black in there, and tried to discern the lid and the shade sides. I will now continue with the peel, so the rind actually. When you look at the lemon, there's of course a certain color, and there's a certain color of the peel versus the pulp. So you always make the rind warm yellow and then the pulp a cool yellow, so that's where the blue is for later on. So now I will be just using the same colors plus the very bright yellow one for the outside of the lemon. And you might see that it's pretty hard to get the lemon from the background, while yet also the background is very useful for the lemon because it's yellow, so we can use it, the ochre, as a shade tone actually for the peel. As you can see, I'm trying to use the background color in the rind because it's already there. And of course today paint is not that expensive, but in the 17th century it was, so you would use everything you had, and if you could, you would paint as less as possible. Okay, so now after the rind and the pith, it's time for the pulp, and the pulp is, as I said, a more cool yellow. So it's, of course, all yellows, and you have to discern the different parts. So that's why there is blue added to the yellow. We've got an azurite-like blue, a bit grayish, that is. And we use the very bright yellow again. And for the lighter parts, you use white to mix in, and for the darker parts, black. And the thing is, with the pulp, of course, it's somewhat translucent. So the lid side of the pulp might just be here, because light's coming through and, well, touching the edge there. So that's a bit difficult where you make it dark and where you make it light. Because the light comes from this side, well, that side in still life. But what's also the thing is, if you paint this darker and you add the sheen or the highlights on top of it later, then it has much more effect. So it works better to have the lid side here. And of course, by adding blue, you get a very sour, bitter lemon. Of course, also you have more shade in the white pith here, so then the contrast's bigger when you have the lid side of the pulp here. Now that's it for the pulp, really. Now it's time to highlight both the rind, so the warm yellow parts, and the pulp parts. In order to do that, it needs to dry. Of course, we're using water mixable oil paint, so it'll go a bit faster. We're continuing with the tin or pewter plate underneath the lemon. It has its own color combination. Yeah, well, I'll be using a part of the palette, especially for the tinware. And that's these 5 colors. I'm not sure if I'm going to use the red, but it is a 17th century way also to add a little vermilion, so a very bright red, so I just brought it. I'll be adding black first to the palette. Raw umber. Ochre, although I will of course try to use the colored background for that, but might need it. White is definitely needed. Well, and a bit of the bright red, and we'll see if that will do something for us. I'll be mixing some greys to start painting the shape, which is of course very difficult because it needs to be a nice oval shape. And just to do that inner oval, which from my point of view goes from somewhere here, well, that's already a bit weird, to here. So I'll now add more shade and more light, and then I'll try filling it up in between. And I now see that there's a bit too much darker gray here. If you want to see ochre, and we of course like to see ochre because now we can use the color background. I continued painting the plate and I'm still working on it, and it's getting darker and darker, and just in a few moments I'll be adding lights to it. And it's very transparent. That's because we're using water mixable oil paint. You can of course use real oil paint, and then the nice thing with the real oil paint is that you don't really need to dilute it. And of course also because you then have the time. And that you can brush it on very dry. Yeah, you can dilute oil paint with oil as well. And then it's a thicker substance, of course, than oil paint with water. What I'm doing here. I decided not to use the red because the background's already very warm, so you see it shining through, but you could have used it here in the tin plate, I think. It's a bit of a warmer tone than in the other spots. I'll now add some highlights to the peel of the lemon, because we still need to do that. Also some reflection here, light is reflected, so you see a bit bright yellow in the shade. I'm using the very light yellow, which was untouched before, to add a bit of highlights here. I'm doing it a bit wobbly because of that skin of the lemon, that you get the same effect. Okay, like that. Perhaps a bit here and there. Well, like that, then your lemon is really finished. And then now quickly we'll add some colors for the linen cloth underneath. And now with a coarser brush, got a pig's hair brush here, I'll add some shade. And since it's all in the same tones, you can still paint pretty transparently, because you can, it's not a bad thing if you see the ochre shining through. Well, the linen on the table, of course, needs some more work, but you get the point, and it also really contrasts really nicely. The final thing to do is to add a darker background. So that means just scumbling, so very dryly going over the ochre ground. Can again be transparent, that's fine. You need a bit of a coarse brush, which you can use this way. And then you add some extra depth. So do it here. I'm now ignoring the thing on which the still life is actually standing, just to show you how it's done. And this way you work your way up towards the light, where you might even want to add some white to get really a beam here. But that's an option. You see it often in these 17th century still life paintings. And I think you get the point here. You can finish the painting now, like I will. And thank you for watching.
Thank you very much for this great lesson, Lisa.
Thanks. Bye.